everyone. I welcome everyone for our next interesting CXO Wellness live stream. Before I introduce our guest speaker and before I give it over to Amit, I will like to give a brief about GALF. GALF is a wellness aggregator based in Mumbai with pan-India presence and global ambitions. We provide corporate wellness ecosystem through our web app, mobile app, and customized holistic interventions. Our holistic wellness interventions cover physical, mental, emotional, nutritional, financial, social, and environmental aspects. In GALF, as it has been dealing with various corporate clients from varied industries, we pay a significant focus on all the aspects of holistic wellness when we make customized programs for our corporate clients. Now, that was a brief about GALF. I will give it over to Amit to introduce our guest.
All right. Thank you, Neha. Thank you for a very succinct narration. Good morning, good evening, and maybe good afternoon to various people who are joining from various parts of the country. And I can see some people joining from outside India also. So Ram, you're already, the session is already in demand. I would take liberty to mention few things about Ram. Ram is the CEO of one of the largest investment bank, wealth management bank in the country. But other than as a banker, he's an avid athlete. For all those people who are uninitiated, he's a marathoner who's aspiring to be a half Ironman. I've known Ram for nearly 7 years now and extremely blessed to be mentored by him and GALF being mentored by him. Ram, as I know him, is a transformation specialist who has kind of turned around businesses, who believe in building businesses, who believes in fostering entrepreneurship. So this is definitely a session that all the young budding entrepreneurs, CXOs, corporate employees, should definitely listen very, very carefully as Ram kind of not just touches on the professional aspect of it, but also walks through the wellness aspect of it on covering emotional, mental, social, and maybe on certain aspects, the environmental aspects too. So over to you, Ram. In your own words, we would like to hear from you about yourself and your journey, please.
Thank you so much, Amit. First and foremost, it's a pleasure to be here with you, as well as the audience that you have so carefully nurtured and curated. It's wonderful to see you go about your work. And I think through the conversation, I think you will hear me say this many times. I'm very grateful for having people like you in my life who continuously keep me inspired. So well done, Amit. In terms of my own life journey, let me kind of touch on a few things, and maybe if it interests your audience, we can come back to those aspects or those areas where maybe we can dive one more level. I started off in a place called Coimbatore. I was born and brought up there. I spent a large part of my formative years there, well through my college. My vivid recollection of those days was outside home. I was very active, took to various kind of sports. Cricket was my favorite. I represented, or I was selected to play for the Coimbatore cricket team. Unfortunately, it didn't translate into many matches by that time. We got to playing. It was already time for me to move from Coimbatore. The other thing that I vividly recollect is those were the times when, today we talk about mobile phones and, all of those devices. I'm talking about, the 80s when even television sets were such a privilege. And I remember having seen, along with a bunch of friends from the local society, the Olympics. And, something caught on to us, the fancy, the imagination. And we kind of did our own Olympics with hosting a variety of events. And I remember distinctly as to how, it took up much of our, waking time. Nothing much to do apart from getting back from school and then starting to do your own thing. One day it will be athletics, the other day we will have field events. We had a fun time. And I dabbled into a variety of activities. So You from cricket, we used to play badminton, kabaddi. We used to, there was a neighboring college which used to have a large field. So I remember getting up early, cycling all the way there, running. So it has been with me, so to speak, all my formative years. I moved from Coimbatore for my MBA program to Andhra. And then from there, I got to Chennai in my first job in Citibank. Spent 3 years with them, moved on from there. I wanted to try and see whether I could replicate some of the success that I had in Citibank in my early years in a different environment outside India. So I got an opportunity to work with Standard Chartered. This was in the Middle East. Middle East did not have, or specifically Dubai did not have the connotation that it has today of very glitzy cosmopolitan city. Those days, it is those who kind of failed to make it to the Western world, UK and the US, gravitated towards the Middle East. So I was, at least to my parents, a bit of an embarrassment that I ended up in Dubai. But frankly, those were great years. We saw the city grow up in front of our eyes. We grew along with the city. And I spent about 12, 13 years with Standard Chartered. Some of us who kind of missed the bus when the financial services industry was open in India in the 2000s with the licenses given to HDFC, ICICI, always wanted to come back and try and see if we can do stuff in our own country, in our own local market. So when the opportunity came up in 2007 to come back to India, I immediately put my hand up. I came back to Barclays to set up the retail and the commercial bank. It was an unmitigated disaster, but that is a long story or long time away. Since then, from 2011, we've been, as you described, a wholesale franchise, corporate investment bank, and the private bank. And frankly, I think it has been a story of consolidation, a story of playing to our strengths, and a story of being available for our clients and trying to do what best we can in terms of our connectivity to the deep Western capital markets, and for clients, overseas clients, try and help them get access to India. So it's been one eventful journey. Through all of this, I think sports has been common. There was a brief period when I was in Dubai, when maybe I think I didn't get the work-life integration proper. I think I was away from it. No sooner did I come back to India, back again. And as you rightly described, I've been trying to do my bit in terms of trying to keep myself engaged, marathon, and now this Ironman aspiration.
Great. That is an interesting integration between a sports life and your corporate life, Ram. So taking it forward from there, your interest in sports since childhood and your exciting events in the corporate. Well, my first question is, we have been seeing, various corporate houses supporting wellness and fitness initiatives. Well, both as a part of, some brand positioning strategy and also in certain cases as a cause. What are your views on that? And what are the other angles which, plays a vital role in taking these initiatives for any corporate to get the wellness and fitness aspect?
You're right, Neha. I think one of the things that we have seen happen, as we build careers in this industry, is that I think from just being focused on profits, or what we used to call shareholder capitalism, I think the view of a modern corporation has moved into something called conscious capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, where it isn't important that you just maximize output for one constituency, but you do it for a broad variety of stakeholders. So in some ways, I would think that the journey where you see large corporations or any corporation trying to be behind some of the social causes, be it on the citizenship side, be it on the corporate social responsibility side, or in just promoting sporting fabric in the country, I think we've seen a lot of that happen. And that is, in many ways, I think this move from focusing just on one constituency into trying to play to the larger base or larger ecosystem. As you said, this could be an angle where you try to use the vehicle. Let's say, for example, I sponsor a major fitness event. This could be because I think that is a good means for not just improving my brand awareness, but it could also be something that I would like to resonate with what I believe the bank or the brand stands for. So if we were to think of, how the TCS chairman described when they became the lead sponsors for the Mumbai Marathon, he was talking about how close the tenets are to Tata's of, marathon, patience, perseverance, excellence. Some of those, there is a brand, it resonates with the brand and what that sporting event is. So I think it could be a way to marry those two. The other angle that it could play is just give one more cause or one more avenue, one more tool to employees so that they identify themselves more strongly with that particular theme. It is always it is true, and I think much of what GALF stands for is just that, right? If we can give people the right awareness or education, you give them the tools, the social connectivity, and a bit of appreciation, I think lo and behold, everybody wants to change behavior, right? So, in many ways, I think what you see happen around corporates sponsoring some of these events, some of these causes, I think is also in some ways trying to be a responsible citizen, not just from external standpoint of view, but also in the eyes of their own employees. So that's how I'm seeing it. We used to sponsor the Premier League, and I think the association of that sporting event with Barclays is something that resonates even in a market like India, where we don't have a high street presence. We are, as I said, a niche corporate investment bank, but the association of football that resonates with kids. So Barclays isn't a name that they will be unfamiliar with. That also helps, right? So many ways in which I think you can have a positive step.
True. And just kind of, if I may take liberty of stepping in. So while there is, a full-blown support by certain brands like Tata, you mentioned about your own brand being associated to a particular sporting event, to an extent that the whole event start getting resonating with that particular brand itself. But there's also a kind of a high level, a very interesting inclination that I'm seeing, that a lot of brands are trying to make towards sports or wellness. Right. Example being CAF's kind of come out with wellness kitchens. Godrej kind of come out with wellness homes. So how do you see that player? Do you think is wellness the new talk of the town? There was a time when people will say, if you are the young generation, if you are the kind of X generation, then you are the in thing. So is wellness the new thing, sir?
I think you raise a good observation, Ahmed. This is how slowly we have moved away from, optimizing or maximizing in one dimension to think of ourselves as a holistic being, right? So you think about the word well-being. In many ways, I think this is what is well-being? Maybe we can start with that. It is an experience of health. It is an experience of happiness. It is being socially connected. It is being purposeful. It is having good mental health. It is having high life satisfaction. So you're talking about many dimensions, right? It is not just, mobility, moving about, eating well, sleeping well, which is shall I say, physical well-being. And when you described the GALF, you spoke about you're not just in the physical well-being space, but you're also in the mental, emotional well-being space. You also spoke about being in the, workplace well-being space, societal well-being space. So you, rather than try and work on one dimension, I think the feeling now is that we have to think about this as a system, a little more holistic sense of trying to maximize in multiple dimensions. I think that is how this entire thing about wellness has come to be, and I think it's a step in the right direction.
True. Thank you for sharing your inputs. Over to you, Neha.
Okay. Well, when we are talking about, the wellness aspect, the holistic aspect, as per you, especially if I talk about the banking and financial services, what are the strategic initiatives, being taken by corporates which you see around, especially because my favorite being the mental, emotional wellness and the social part with it. How do you think that the corporates are initiating these in their companies and including yours?
And we know that you are very, very passionate about the social causes yourself.
That was my next, yes.
Yeah. So I think let's go back to this well-being piece. And I think one aspect of it is, we touched on that briefly earlier. I think at the core of this is the desire to change behavior. And I think we said that earlier, with the right awareness, motivation, tools, and support, people are willing to change behaviors. And if you think about corporations like us, or any business that requires or that is in the people side of things, and literally every business is a people's business, you are thinking about, how is it that you can move up in terms of trying to make them more engaged, trying to help them be more, if you think about this Maslow's, chain hierarchy of needs, people feel appreciated, people feel that they are creative, they're able to solve problems, only if they are in an environment that fosters that. Yeah, there is some bit that is intrinsic, that is some bit that is extrinsic. And one of the key things that companies spend a lot of time thinking about is, how do we get one's environment, otherwise called culture, right, in such a way that we can foster this behavior change. And I think, this drive towards wellness and thinking about this in a holistic sense is something that I think an idea whose time has come. So several examples abound. So if you look at our own organization, right from just creating a framework where, you provide, awareness of, what are some of the, approaches one can take in order to change behavior. I think we facilitate a lot of that. Then you move on from just creating awareness to creating a support circle where, along with your buddies, you try and push each other to try and ensure that you stick with it, and you ensure that you don't go back to your old ways of working, but you maintain progress as we move along. So I think if you think about what large corporations are doing, they are trying to build a complete ecosystem, including maybe getting providers like GALF to help them think about how do we structure that in such a way that we have at people's fingertips, if possible, all of these things available. So that's an idea whose time has come. Corporate wellness, I think, is certainly what we're seeing.
Definitely, and I would like to kind of dig a little deeper on that as we go further, towards certain set of questions. But There's a point that kind of still stuck in my mind about what you mentioned in the beginning about conscious capitalism and moving away to a new world order. So you've been leading organizations at CXO level and earlier as in your capacity as a chief operating officer and now as a CEO, at least for the last 3 years. How do you see the role and the focus areas evolving for CXOs in that context now?
I think
maybe over the last 1 decade,
Yeah, and I think the way you started this, Ahmed, I think that is one change that has happened in front of our eyes, right? When we started in the industry, I think there was this view that businesses exist to make money. I think that has changed. The other way by which I think things have changed is just the definition of leadership. Yeah, I think in the old world, you used to think about leadership as command and control. It is as if there is somebody who sits at the top of the pyramid. He or she has a view of the world, and they try and propound a view of what that will mean for the company, and then suddenly everybody rallies towards that central figure, and things happen. I think that isn't the way how the modern organizations are constructed. I think leadership now is very diffused. It happens across the organization, across levels. I think it is almost a myth to assume that decisions are made at the top and the view of the world and how the organization should adapt to the external circumstances is coming from the top. I think all of that has just been busted. The other thing that I see in the last 20, 25 years is also about how hierarchies or structures have kind of collapsed, right? You no longer lead by virtue of positional authority. You lead by virtue of competence, capability, by influence, etc.
True.
And one of the common strings across all of this is, how do we, bring each one of us, in our entire self to the workplace, right? That's an important piece, because if you're thinking leadership is diffused, and if you want your organization to be agile, flexible to how the external environment is moving, you need everyone in the company to pull weight. And that can only help, that can only come about if that discretionary element of effort from each one of the, in the staff or colleagues that we have in the organization also think about it in the same way. And if you want to expect discretionary energy from staff or discretionary effort from staff, then that has to be fostered by an environment. Again, you go back to the same place, which is the environment can only foster if that environment is rooted in some of the concepts that we already covered.
Agreed.
It does not look at somebody as a resource, but looks at them as a complete being who brings in, authenticity, integrity into the workplace. So you again go back to this well-being concept and how, that is important if you have to get, the modern corporation running right. So
I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, I totally, absolutely agree with you. I think there's an element of it which is about environmental wellness, which you kind of touched upon even in this response and earlier too. There are two elements to it, which is both your internal environment and your external environment. And the very fact that the way you look up to your external environment is defined once you take care of your internal environment. Right. So the very fact that your organization is kind of taking care of certain social causes, whether it is supporting kids, supporting the women in the industry and stuff like that, it's all about how internally as an environment and as a culture that is kind of brewed and, and well maintained. So definitely kind of reckon with you. Since you kind of spoke about this, in terms of the role of CXOs has moved to greater extent in terms of enabling people towards influence, towards creating kind of a system where talents can be nurtured. It is more about what contribution that people are making to the organization rather than necessarily top-down, authority-driven. If I take a step back and say, hey, all this is brilliant, right? We're talking about people, we're talking about, great culture, but here's an industry. Here's an industry which is intense. Here's an industry which has got high pressure, stuffed with stressful moments. You've got market exigencies, the ones like right now, it's like, it's the most cruel ride I've seen in the stock market in the years that I can probably remember since 2007. There are regulatory requirements which are kind of changing by the day. Sometimes they go back and they kind of date the changes. And then there are client expectations, obviously, in the current scenario, as it's also very evident. The new set of product development that you have to do. And then also, even after you've done all this, you have to retain the high pot talent because you might kind of lose them to the market. How do you bring in a balance in your priorities and still pursue your individual passion as a CEO? So this got an element of both of you as a CEO and you as an individual person who's passionate about a cause.
I think this is something where, in my own, as I reflect on my own career, maybe there are moments or phases where this balance that you call out, I haven't, or maybe I didn't feel like I had struck it properly. I think in my mind, I think in hindsight and with, the virtue of a lot of support, both from the organization, colleagues around me, family, friends around me. I think one of the things that I realized that is if we take intentional action to do what matters for people who matter to us, I think the stress goes down.
True.
If we do intentional action for people who matter, to do what matters to them, I guess the stress goes down. So what this means is that you're looking for ways of win-win. As in, if you look at, again, going back to this holistic thing. So there are 3 or 4 dimensions, right? So there's one dimension, which is work and career. There is one dimension, which is, what we call as life, which is one aspect of it is family, right? One aspect of it is community. And the last aspect of it could be yourself, which is, it could be mind, it could be body, it could be spirit. So think about this as a 4-way thing. Yeah, you've got work, career, then you've got family, then you've got community, and then you've got self. And I think one of the things that I have increasingly come to realize is that if we can, just like you approach a project at work, if you can approach what you want to get out of. So it's a realistic self-assessment of how we are faring on these 4 buckets. So, one of the precious assets that we as corporate, citizens have is attention and focus, right? We may not be able to bring all of our focus and all of our attention on one dimension. It's a scarce resource, right? So you do a simple assessment of out of those 4 dimensions, where are we? Where are we in terms of our focus? Where are we in terms of that particular sphere's importance for ourselves? Yeah. So how important is it to us? How much attention are we bringing currently? How are we performing from our assessment? And what is it that the other people for whom you're doing this? If it is work, let's say your boss. If it is for community, let's say it's for some organization that you strongly identify it. What is it that they have to say of your contribution to them? So it's a classic self-assessment of where you stand. And from there you have, you set up some goals as to where you want to get your current performance to where you want to, just like you would do for any project at work. And then through a series of small experiments, and changes in habits, you try and see in such a way that you are able to work towards your goals in a manner that it isn't all about you, but it's also about all of those four associated stakeholders. I'll give you an example of what I'm saying. So let's assume one of the, in your balance, in your, shall I say, stakeholder assessment, or in your 4-grid assessment, one of the things that you want to say is that you want to find some time to learn new skills, right? So in the classic way of approaching this work-life balance would be is, I demand from my employer some time so that I can pursue the skill. That's the classic approach. I'm saying that there is a frame that we can apply where we can stand that around and say that, how is it that this skill, if I acquire, is going to help my work and career and my supervisor and my people around me? And if I can solve that, and if I can enlist people at work in such a way that they also help me in me trying to acquire these skills, suddenly it's a win-win for everybody.
True.
The problem is that we approach it as unidimensional. Again, the concept of trying to maximize it for everybody is so important. So the heart of this work-life discussion is to think about this as work-life integration, not as work-life balance, and think about this as how you can solicit support from all the associated people so that you can make some changes in behavior and learn and progress based on what feedback you generate on the way. I think that's how I would think about work-life balance and the larger question. Hindsight, I wish I had this advice, when I was younger. But one thing I can tell you, I think it only gets easier as you move up the hierarchy. I would think, once you reach that famous middle age, I think you are fraught with a crisis, and then suddenly, lo and behold, you find a lot of time to do things that you always wanted to do, and you are in a tearing hurry because the clock is ticking.
So that's the lighter side of you, but I'm so glad that you kind of still so driven and energetic about it. You've been kind of rattling, and I've been making notes as if probably I'm going to appear at the interview the next moment. But this was really, really, really words of wisdom. You spoke about intentional action towards people who matter. You spoke about really creating a kind of a grid of sorts with kind of a integration into your life with work, family, society, and self. Ultimately, I think the way I kind of look at it is that once this integration is something which can be driven through a certain kind of an ecosystem, that leads to a certain lifestyle, right? And lifestyle is something that you not only have really charted out for yourself. I mean, there's a traditional view about lifestyle being, possession driven. And here it is about value driven in terms of what value you've created for yourself and for others, and how are you kind of doing it in your organization too. So this is really, really enriching, Ram. Thank you so much for this response.
And none of this is original, Amit. Total leadership. This is a gent. He's a professor in Wharton. Stu Friedman, if I remember right.
Okay.
He has spent years. He was in the Ford Leadership Development Center. This is called, if I recollect right, a total leadership or 4 ways of working or something like that. There are 4 charts. Stu Friedman, I think total leadership, and this name, you can do a Google search, and these resources are available for everybody.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ram. Over to you, Neha.
Okay. Thank you so much, Amit. Thank you, Ram, for this insightful learnings which we have just learned. So what I could, if I can just recap everything in just one sentence, everybody has to go in an integration. Everybody is what you are a people's person. You want to take everything with you and taking all the aspects when you move forward. I went through your profile as well, and it says fostering entrepreneurship. So you are an inspiration to a lot of young entrepreneurs as well. Now, my question here is, it is divided in three parts here now. Looking at the current COVID pandemic situation, we have already spoken about the wellness aspect, that what corporates are doing, what you are doing at your level as a corporate, as a personal level. After COVID, do you think the wellness initiative will see a change, a mindset change in corporates, and at different levels for employees, firstly, for customers and clients, because they are, as you said, stakeholders. So they do play a very important role. And third, what would you like to advise these young entrepreneurs who look up to you and, who are under your guidance? So my question is lengthy, but we would really like to hear this from you.
She wants to make the best use of time.
And let me try and see if I can cover all aspects of your question. So let me start with this. I think one of the things is that crisis always amplifies your current vulnerabilities. It exacerbates the problem. So if, let's say, for example, you were carrying some parts of, we talked about several constructs, right? One construct is we said that we are we are made up of the physical, our mobility of the body, how much we eat, how much we sleep, emotional well-being, how much we can regulate our emotions, how much are we willing to accept feedback. There are various components, right? And if there were shortcomings in any of those, a crisis situation tends to amplify that. Yeah. So first and foremost is to try and get a sense of what is it that from within us we would like to change. People call this self-concordant goals, as in you are, whether it is well-being, whether it is a response to a crisis, at the heart of everything is a desire to change behavior. And I want to, if there is one thing that people retain from all that has been spoken today, is just that, which is that at the heart of everything lies our motivation to make change. So let's go back to this crisis situation. Yeah. So we said first and foremost that crisis amplifies vulnerabilities. And the second one is, if it amplifies vulnerabilities, and if you do some sincere stock taking, and you do that stock taking not in a relative sense, I seem not to have it, but somebody else seems to have it, I think in my mind, that fizzles out pretty quickly. But if you started in a place that, it is because you believe that you want to drive some change on that particular vector, I think the chances are you've got something to base yourself on. People talk about this many different ways, right? The why of a change. If you can put out the rationale as to why you need to change, then it becomes easier for people to accept change. That is one way of thinking. When you think about modern corporations and you think about work life or career, people talk about purposeful role, meaningful role. Again, it is the why we are doing what we are doing. So once that is cemented and you pick up some aspect of your whole that you want to progress on, you've started on the right path. So you've defined your goals. And then again, it is proven, it is scientific, there is volumes of research on this topic that more than hard work, more than a lot of effort, one of the things that sustains change is to take small and simple steps, design experiments, and try and seek gains. So, as the classic saying goes, 1% change each day is more sustainable than trying to aim for a 10% change in a short period of time. Yeah, and how habits form. There's lots of research on how you can think about to make those small first day steps. Assuming you have made those steps. One of the things that I have done, for example, for me, it's a bit of a, I scratch your back, your scratch mine, mutual admiration club here. But I look up to Amit because he's such a huge inspiration. So if you can get a buddy system or a support network for the change that you want to make, and you enlist people who can keep you faithful to be on that track, and that's the next phase of it, which is you've designed experiments, you start getting appreciation or feedback on how you're going. That, I think, is a vital, important piece in order to make the change effort sustainable. And finally is you make it a ritual. So there are many things, right? You journal because you want to practice mindfulness. So you can create your own little thing that works for you. Pick out 5 things that you want to be grateful for before you hit the bed. Can you pick random time slots in your diary where you spend 5 minutes calling somebody in your network and offering support? There are multiple things that you can think of as to how you can set up some ritual. So I'm thinking that if you've taken self-concordant goals, if you've enlisted the right buddies, and you have started small, and you've started in the experimenting it, and you gain feedback, and you set up those rituals, I think the change is more or less in the bag. And then lo and behold, you find yourself to be a different individual than you are. This is true for peacetime. This is true for war times. So I frankly find it a little, yes, it is indeed the case that the boundaries that existed when people moved away from the place they called office, closed the computer, took the keys and went to their cars, maybe they mentally switched off into a new mode. And therefore that now that distinction or those boundaries is blurred. But the one of the things that I, in the company we speak a lot about is anti-fragility as compared to resilience. And just quickly on that a minute is, if you think about resilience, you're thinking about bouncing back to how you have been in the past. Anti-fragility is about bouncing back stronger and better than how you entered it. Yeah, it's an economist phrase. We use that to try and tell ourselves that let's use this crisis as a moment of opportunity for us. Yeah, and that is how I would like for your listeners and everybody to think about it. It amplifies our vulnerabilities. Whatever is true during peacetime is true in the wartime. It's just that it brings it into sharp focus. And if we think about this in terms of where we want to make meaningful change, and if we do it in such a way that we are making meaningful change for people who hold meaning in our lives, it becomes self-concordant, and then the rest of the process follows. So I'm only echoing what I said earlier. I don't have anything new to offer.
So on this one, Ram, if I may kind of take liberty, so you just kind of, dovetailed into the previous response, and you kind of obviously made an extension to it by saying, crisis amplifies your vulnerabilities, and there has to be genuine desire to change people's behavior, which has to become more kind of prominent in the current scenario, be it COVID or pandemic, whatever you want to call it as. You did talk about, this interesting, vocabulary about anti-fragility versus resilience, and I'm sure this kind of, makes more sense when you kind of explain to me that crisis as a moment of opportunity, and also that when we come back in a far much more reformed and a better way. Any very specific set of initiatives, that you're seeing at an industry level, I'm not necessarily trying to narrow down at a company level, that you're seeing or hearing that which organizations are trying to say? So we heard about work from home. We talked about, there are companies like TCS saying by 2025 we'll only have 25% of our workforce operating off premises, and then there are kind of Wipros of the world who are kind of stepping in and giving their own figure. There are organizations who are saying that to your earlier point about we will make wellness as one of the key employee value propositions, because if a diversified workforce sat in multiple remote locations, we want to use that as a medium for employee engagement. But over and above that, are there any specific things that you are observing that which maybe we have not spoken about today?
You mean in the industry or
at industry level, in particular in context of employee wellness as a resultant of COVID?
Okay, as on the employee wellness side, right?
Yes.
So maybe I think it is pretty obvious, Amit, that thus far there was a mindset issue. It wasn't as if technology wasn't there to permit people to be operating from home, right? I think suddenly there was, a mindset change, where suddenly we now find more reasons as to how to make it work than why it won't work, right?
True.
I think what were these physical premises earlier? What did they stand for? There was a statement of intent. This was a place where people anchored a sense of belonging, right? Now, what has happened is in those last 7 weeks or so, and for some markets even longer, we have somehow engendered a new way of working, which possibly seems to transcend the need for us to spend 1 hour each way trying to make it amidst all of these, pollution and all of that into the workplace. So I think certainly we haven't seen the last of that, which is, do premises, do offices the way we know them or before COVID, will they be the same going forward? And I think that has got some wellness implications as well, right?
True.
Because that could be potentially a large part of stress in people's lives to be able to make the commute, to do it on time. The second aspect is just what we spoke about in the earlier question, the way of thinking about these anti-fragile muscles. What are some of the levers that we have to thrive irrespective of the circumstance? I think that's what we are all looking for, right? What is the signs of personal flourishing? If we are able to decode that for each one of us, that will apply now, that will apply, post COVID as well. And some of what we spoke about, whether it is relationships, whether it is health, physical health, the way we think about it, sleeping well, eating well, moving your body, that quotient of it. Then I think people think about typically, passion, purpose, and I'm thinking about it from the sense of what strengths do you bring to play. I think that could be driven from a good understanding of what you think your strengths are, and so all of this is pretty much, I would think, fundamental. It will bring a sharper focus, Amit. So, whether you call it wellness industry as such, but by and large, I think things that, we were focusing on, maybe beginning to think about, I think will just get accelerated along the lines of what we spoke.
True. And that was an interesting thing that you spoke about on personal flourishing. I think you've got all the time right now to make use of those, time that people used to spend on roads. That said, I will bring in some very important subject, which, kind of is instigated by a lot of questions and queries that people have been talking about. And one aspect of wellness that a lot of companies kind of leave untouched, which is financial wellness. Now, when you say financial wellness, today, one of the biggest stressors amongst people and young entrepreneurs and businesses alike is that what would happen to me? Would my job be there? Would I have a continuity of income? Would the same world order that I was used to allow me to do business? Will my business survive or not? Particularly for MSMEs and for larger businesses, right? They want to say, oh, with this mammoth amount of infrastructure, mammoth amount of investments that we have made, do we need to make any kind of product changes? Do we need to make any, so there are a lot of thoughts happening. So my question is, and having shared the sentiment of all these three, what are some of the key pointers that you want to provide as guidelines for planning? So for at an individual level, probably someone who's working, in terms of financial wellness, what are the 2 or 3 things that they can focus on? To MSMEs and probably CXOs of large companies who are probably your peers and counterparts listening to this session.
Amit, you put me in a spot. I don't think I have that kind of deep insight. But here is my 1 or 2 thoughts on that topic. First and foremost, I think an important component of financial wellness is the sense of budgeting. Yeah. And that plays out in many ways. If you think about India, I think the key question is, people are asking, okay, if US can do whatever 18% of the GDP as fiscal stimulus, why is India being so measured in terms of its stimuli? We are doing roughly about 1%, 1.5%. So it's the same thing, right? About spending beyond one's needs.
Yeah.
The sense of, where the boundaries lie. I think that if one can absorb early, I think that will.
Very powerful. Very, very powerful. I think this is alike for all the things. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, saying live within the means and probably, if possible, get debt free. Not the thing that I need to say in front of the banker, but yeah, go debt free.
Yeah, and I think the second thing is, one of the things to be very clear about is the concept of debt and leverage. I think debt and leverage works only if the return is higher than the cost of the debt or the cost of the leverage.
Yes.
Sometimes people miss that fundamental piece. They try and lever themselves and end up, creating something which is possibly bigger but less profitable, and therefore it then eats away at your ability to, so that budgeting piece, I think, is so essential. And then when you want to infuse leverage or debt in your business, and what return will commensurate that element of risk, I think is a lesson that one needs to learn pretty early.
Lovely, Ram.
I'll leave it at that, and maybe I think if there is some question, a little more sense of elaboration, I think we can get that.
Absolutely, but I will still take liberty to kind of recap this because this is something of everyone's interest. So there's very powerful 3 pointers that Ram spoke about, and I think they cut across all these 3 segments that I spoke about. The first thing, which is very clear, is understand your budget. If you don't have one, make one. Be very clear about what your income, what your expenses are, and more importantly, what your budgetary arrangements are. The second thing Ram particularly said about is stay within the means. And I would probably say stay much within the means in the current circumstances, because you need to have that kind of a headroom to deal with emergency and exigency. And the third thing, which is very, very powerful, probably people who may get very, very tempted or may get kind of an emotional high because some of them may not have had an opportunity to spend because of the market shutdown, or some of the assets might become very lucrative as you kind of step out, particularly in real estate. Make sure that your debt and leverage are utilized only when the returns are much higher than the cost of the debt and leverage. Am I right, Ram? Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, so these are very, very powerful messages, and I think that's something that people might thank me for recapping on your behalf, Ram. Okay, there is one more question, if Neha, you permit me with the time, if that's all right with you.
Yes, absolutely, Amit.
Okay, so Ram, particularly coming close to the industry that you represent, which is banking and financial services. Now, this is going to be an interesting one, right? As it is for a large commercial bank, particularly investment bank and private banks. I don't see a lot of people really walking into the branches. But again, there was a customer contact, right? Clearly, with the new set of precautions and the longevity of these precautions looks like to be for really sizable amount of time, even if the lockdown kind of goes away. What are the specific changes that you are seeing, not just in terms of the customer contact, but as an operating model or maybe business model, for some of these, banks and financial services institutions? Uh, do you see really any exit from the traditional methods of products or new products evolving? I know it's kind of a bit of too much, but maybe some very centered points that would really help our people.
I think there are a couple of themes emerging. One theme is in terms of customer self-help. What I mean is channels of interaction or channels which were dependent on the physical world. I think there seems to be a sense of accelerating towards digital mechanisms. So think about how India works on wet signatures, franking. Some of those, I think, in the last 7 weeks, we've realized that those are some constraints that I think even during peace times we would like to resolve. Yeah, so that's one broad theme. Trying to place it at customers' fingertip, the ability to either select a service or in case modify, etc., do it themselves. So essentially, simply said, digital initiatives that were work in progress has only gotten accelerated. AI, using assisted intelligence, etc. All of that, is only on the, shall I say, fast drive forward.
True.
The second theme that is building strongly is around supply chain disruptions, right? You could be dependent on, so three or four ways in which you can think about this, I would think. One is you can think about this as countries, right? So large dependency on China, and this entire thing about trying to get ahead of companies in terms of an alternative place for manufacture. I think that is one theme that is gaining currency every day. The second way of thinking about the same problem could be is, even if you had reliance on domestic supplier partners, chances are that they may not have been as resilient as you may have anticipated it to be.
True.
So what arrangements do you put in place now in light of that? Is it again go through the list to see what critical activities that weren't happening? The call center, the impact of the call center industry is one classic example of this. So people are going through this assessment of, can we produce something ourselves? Earlier, the mentality for businesses were, cost versus or efficiency versus customer intimacy kind of trade-offs. Now, my sense is that the pendulum will swing the other way, where I think there will be some element of retaining production locally that might be in vogue. So I think these are one or two things. We spoke about work from home or move away from these premises, as we know. I think could be one directional trend. One of the other things positive for our industry is compared to the last crisis that, in our lifetime, we've only seen these two, right? The great financial crisis of 2008, where the financial services industry were the villains. Now, we are part of the solution. Any stimulus, any intervention that the government and the regulators are thinking about, banks are conduits to making that happen in the real economy. So I think that way it is different this time than earlier. So some early thoughts on it.
Lovely. As much as I'm getting very, very tempted to take a deep dive and know a little more about the MSMEs in that context, but I'm just conscious of the time. We didn't realize how we kind of really waltzed through that 1 hour. So on that parting note, if you are able to share with us, as much as you are part of the essential services and you're kind of still going to the bank almost every day, what is one? Did you really get time to take a breath and probably enjoy those moments of self-reflection like most of the other businesses CXOs have, and maybe also savor some of your much sought after delicacies at home?
Indeed, I think my wife and daughter, they base themselves out of Coimbatore. They don't stay here with me in Mumbai. So this was a great opportunity to, be together as a family.
Wow.
And right from, so the latest thing that we did was I was trying to improve my drawing skills. So this was a three-way, competition between spouse, daughter, and me as to who can draw. She has a specific name for the dinosaur. I don't know what the name is, but we all tried our hands, and no surprise, my daughter bet us hands down.
Lovely, excellent, and I'm sure this is something that people must be beaming with joy listening from you. I really, really want to thank you for absolutely brilliant, knowledge-intensive session today, Ram. It was my personal delight to have you here today. I'm sure Neha kind of joins me to echo that sentiment. We would like to take liberty to quickly thank our brand partners who made it possible for this session to happen. That's Garmin, Boston Up India, Aromica Tea, and HealthTrack Healthcare. Thank you so much, Ram, for spending and investing so much of time with us today.
Thank you so much, Amit. It was a pleasure. Neha, appreciate it.
Thank you, Ram. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.